Yomi Yori is a legendary map. It's long been one of the standards for difficulty in Osu, because of just how absurd it was at the time it was ranked, and just how absurd it is even to this day. The map is just stupidly hard. Not only because it has 8.3 star 220 BPM streams for 8 minutes that require incredible aim, consistency, and stamina, but also strangely enough because of the weight of its achievement, and just how many attempts people have put in. It's almost cursed, because despite its insane difficulty, it seems like with every single top player in the game playing it, someone should have gotten luckier than this. But they haven't. Why hasn't anyone been able to FC it? And what makes the map so absurdly difficult? This is a story of a map that's a testament to just how far player skill can be pushed. This is the history of Yomi Yori. Yomi Yori was originally submitted on May 28th of 2016 to excitement from players and mostly positivity from mappers. Many players were excited to see such a high-starred map that seemed actually rankable, and so the map got many high-profile playtesters, like Gaze and Rafis. This meant it was basically immediately accepted by players. But the actual ranking in the map wasn't going to be quite so easy. This is because the map was 8 minutes long and in a difficulty range Dokido, the mapper, had never mapped for. He also hadn't ranked anything since 2012, which is why the map definitely needed some work. But everything went shockingly smoothly, and surprisingly enough, it was qualified only 2 months after submission. The thing was that at the time of submission, the map was not only a change of pace for the mapper Dokido, but it was also a change of pace for pretty much everyone else, because it was going to be the hardest ranked map in the game, dethroning the apparition and becoming one of the first 8-star maps to be ranked, before it was disqualified for a spelling mistake. This would make you think that it wouldn't take too long to be requalified, and it would even get one of the 2 bubbles that needed to be requalified in a fairly short period of time, before being basically abandoned. This wasn't because Dokido wanted it though, since he said that the BNs that were supposed to qualify it just left. The map was basically on the verge of dying for something that stupid, and in August 2016 it seemed like there was no hope. A map in a rankable state, but with no one to do it. But in November, he would once again try, and this time it would go better, and the map would eventually get ranked in January of 2017. The extremely long period that it took for the map to be ranked would actually end up being quite important, since the map was already made by someone who had only ranked maps in 2012, and so it looked a bit dated even in early 2016. But especially by 2017, things like the right angle streams at the start of the map were sort of unheard of, and in many ways it showed its age. But it had been extensively playtested by players like Rafis and Gaze, and so despite its eccentricities, top players gravitated towards the map, including Cookiezi. In the first couple days the map was ranked, there were some good runs from Gaze with a 28 miss, and Dust's with a 30 miss. The first had 500 combo, and the second had 1k. Cookiezi would then come along, and set a 10 miss, with Hidden, and also spun out no-fill for some reason. I want to give a brief rundown of the map to show why 10 misses was so inhuman. The map begins with a semi-spaced death stream that drains a large amount of stamina, on top of being really easy to get mind locked on. This leads into 220 cross-map jumps, which are somehow nearly as difficult as the space streams from before. And all of this leads into an even more space stream, which is getting very close to having gaps between the nodes. A stream of this caliber was already basically unheard of, and on a map this long, it seemed straight up absurd. This leads into a long section of jumps which are less difficult than the cross-map ones, but still very hard. This is about 30% of the map, and is usually where nerves start to kick in. This is also followed by the first 1/3 section, which really isn't all that difficult in terms of star rating, but its large spacing and rather odd BPM makes it quite difficult. This leads into the first break, which gives you a chance to relax, which was almost certainly necessary because of the next section, since this is followed by an 128 note stream, which stays very spaced all throughout. This is one of the hardest choke points, since with nerves especially, it's nearly unplayable. This then all leads into streams which are even more spaced than before. If you haven't noticed yet, one of the hardest parts about Yomi Yori is that its difficulty is so consistent. But even despite this consistency, it does have one big diff spike, in what I'll call the section. This is because, after everything we talked about, which has stopped every top player dead in their tracks for years, there's one part that's much more difficult than everything else. Yeah, somehow the map gets even harder, and the streams go fully spaced, making it not only the hardest part of the map, but also one where you can chain tons of misses, and even fail if you get unlucky. And there's still 3 more minutes after this. This means that while setting what would likely be the greatest 1k PP of all time, and one of the greatest scores ever, you'll have to hit cross-map jumps and another 1/3 section, which this time, because of nerves, becomes a silent killer. And then, after one last death stream, the map finally ends. This is why Cookiezi's 10-miss run was so impressive. Like, to put in perspective, Idki and Fire Rage were barely able to beat this miss count with halftime for a few weeks. And the thing was that he also played it with Hidden, which for a map like Yomi Yori makes it exponentially more difficult. The thing was that Cookiezi was not only far ahead of everyone else in terms of skill, but it was also clear that the map fit him nearly perfectly, and even its eccentricities gave him an edge on it. This was stacked on top of the fact that he'd clearly taken a liking to the map, more so than nearly every other ranked map in the game, with it currently being his most played map after his unban. This was why there was a perfect storm for him to set a score on the map, which was somehow better than his already groundbreaking 10-miss. And well, you could say that he did that, when he set one of the most impressive feats ever pulled off in OSU. Four misses. 4 misses on the highest starred map in the game, getting the second best miss count, even including halftime. He choked 1k in 2017 on Yomi Yori of all things. 99% on the map is also so mind-numbingly stupid. And on top of this, it was so obvious that he'd only missed because of nerves. He legitimately went earthquake mode on the entire part after the space streams. It was a score that seemed so impossible that saying the score was ahead of its time is, well, a massive understatement. I think the score is probably the best one to represent just how far ahead of everyone else Cookiezi was in terms of technical skill. And it really did seem like the map had its peak just days after it was ranked. And I would say the real goal at this point was to see how close he could get to Cookiezi's score rather than anything else. And it would take a little bit for anyone to even start getting near it. But in June of 2017, Angel Sim would get an 11-miss run, which is still stupidly impressive, and it was also far and ahead the second best miss count. Dustus would then get relatively close with a 14 miss just a few days later. This made it clear there were some people capable of getting somewhat close to Cookiezi, but at the same time, no one had even beaten his 10 miss from just a day or two after the map was ranked. And even a year after his score, in January of 2018, no one had beat 10 misses, despite Rafis putting in a fair few attempts and getting an 11 and 12 miss run. But finally, in May of 2018, over a year after Cookiezi's 10-miss run, Karthi would finally beat it, with a 9-miss on the map. This score really shows off how good Karthi's consistency was, because he'd really only missed on the hardest parts of the map, which is why he was able to become the first person with a lower miss count. But what this also meant was that despite being quite a nice score, a score close to Cookiezi's still seemed so far out of reach. And time would show that it was. Because up until late 2018, it was not looking great, with the best score being Dustus' 11 miss with a not so great combo. It had been nearly 2 years since his run, and yet no one could even get close to Cookiezi. But in August, an unlikely challenger would come to the map, the Poon. His best play on the map up to that point was a 31 miss in October of the last year, which is why when he played the map and missed around 1400 combo, it seemed like a pretty normal run. But what he'd do next most certainly wasn't, because he would end up missing only 2 times on the entire rest of the map. 2 misses on Yomi Yori. Cookiezi had put the map so far ahead of where it was supposed to be, and the Poon had somehow beaten it. He had a few slider breaks, but it was still an unreal score, and it showed a huge amount of improvement from him. This run did seem exceptionally lucky though, so whether he'd get anywhere near it, and especially whether he'd get a good combo, was up in the air. Well, until later that day, when he'd get a run that seemed like it could be it, the one to beat Cookiezi after 2 years. But then, this happened. He would miss 10 combo before Cookiezi, and end up getting 6 misses instead of 4. His 2 miss had proven that he had the skill. This run showed that despite that, the nerves after 7 minutes of hell were just too much, just like it had been for Cookiezi. This put up an entirely different wall around the map, since while nearly every player could barely play the map, the 2 that had shown the ability to FC had been stopped by nerves. And this seemed especially crushing, since one was the greatest player of all time, and the other one was someone who's exceptionally experienced with maps of this length, and yet the accomplishment of it all had made it an entirely different beast. Well, I say that, but there was also the question of whether Cookiezi could do it, but just didn't feel like it. I say this because he'd get a 19 miss with Hidden Hard Rock. At first, this score only sounds alright, but once you start to put it in perspective, you realize how stupid it is. To this day, not a single person has passed the map with Hard Rock alone, and no one has even gotten close with Hidden Hard Rock. This score is easily just as, or even more impressive than his 4 miss with Hidden. But by this time, he really wasn't trying on the map anymore. This is quite sad, but it also seemed like at this time, other players were finally starting to get close. Especially Mala, who in November of 2018 got 6 misses with accuracy almost on par with Cookiezi's 99%, making it an extremely solid run, especially since without a slider break, he would have had the best combo with 3.2k. This meant that players were finally getting close to being able to dethrone the run, and it seemed like only a matter of time before someone would take number 1 on the map from Cookiezi. This was also followed only a month later by Dustus, who would smash his old best with a 3 miss and 3 slider breaks, becoming the second person to beat Cookiezi's miss count. This is especially impressive when you consider that all 3 misses were on one stream, meaning an FC, or at least an S rank, seemed extremely plausible. Aiki and Varvalian would also get 8 and 9 misses in early 2019. But it was 3 years after the map was ranked, and these players were all still just fighting to get over that first wall of skill. And to make the situation even worse, throughout the majority of 2019, the map had no improvements. But when Vaxe made his return, he would go on a rampage, setting a ton of impressive scores, and then an FC on the newer Yomi Yori, worth over 900 PP. This is why it was quite exciting to see him put in a good amount of attempts on this Yomi Yori, since it seemed like he might be able to do what no one else had. And he basically delivered with this run. The thing that set Vaxe apart from other attempts was that he clearly wasn't stopped by nerves. It was almost inhuman how little he shook on the map. And it seemed like the only 2 misses that he'd had on the hard part were definitely fixable with some luck, making this the first time that an FC seemed relatively possible. This is especially true because unlike Cookiezi, Vaxe was clearly willing to put in the attempts. The thing was that after that run, he was just unable to improve, which actually is a good representation of one of the biggest problems the map had at this point, which was that everyone hates the beginning. It's really, really difficult, and nearly every top player had been mind-blocked on it by this point, meaning that not only were people less willing to put in attempts, but even the vast majority of their attempts that they did put in would just end in the first minute. And as the year turned to 2020, with Cookiezi's 4-year-old score as number 1, it sort of seemed hopeless. But there were still a few good attempts, like Secret Box's 6 miss, and Rairiku's really impressive 3 miss, where he only missed on the jumps in the first half. The sad thing about these was they both had bad combo, and so Cookiezi's run still stood as the number 1 on the map. But luckily there was one player who just suddenly had a huge skill increase. Spare. He'd been predominantly known for his DT ability, which is top 10 in years past, but he'd always been quite decent at flow aim and speed. Still not anywhere near Yomi Yori level though. Well, until early 2020, when his skill set seemed to just evolve. And after his run on the other newer Yomi Yori, he was definitely set up as a candidate for a very good run on the map. But what he'd end up getting was so much more than what was expected. He started off the run by comboing through the first 2.2k combo of the map. This already made it quite a good run, but there had been many of this caliber before, and his miss of the jumps did not bode well for the rest of the map, since it seemed like he was already quite nervous. But he'd proceed to not miss a single time on the entire rest of the map. A one miss. A one miss on Yomi Yori. It was an unheard of run, and it signaled that it was actually possible for him. The thing is that just like before, nerves were not helping, since he got so nervous during his run that he paused halfway through because he said he was lightheaded.
I'm so lightheaded.
His skill was so clearly there, but it seemed like it was unlikely that he'd FC when comboing half the map had nearly killed him. And this would eventually come to fruition, since he would never end up being able to improve his score on the map. But there would be one last challenger to step onto the stage. White Cat. I mean, most people agree that he's alright at the game, but despite being number 1 and undeniably incredible, he'd had the problem of stamina, which has stopped him from getting a good score. But in true White Cat fashion, after practicing 220 for a few days, he'd become the first person to beat Cookiezi's score, with an absolutely stupid combo, but at the same time an overall questionable score. The combo is obviously godlike, but he'd only been practicing 220 for a few days, and so his AC and miscount were undeniably not that great. This made what he would follow with even sadder, since he would set an absolutely mind-blowing score after just a bit more practice, because he'd end up getting an S rank on the map. Literally 0 misses on Yomi Yori, and then it didn't submit. Like, man. First he beats Cookiesi's score with one way worse, and then he gets one that you could argue is actually better, and is beaten by his own score. And since this, there's only been one other really good score on the map, which was a Turnip, who became the second person to beat Cookiesi's score with a bonkers 1 miss. That's one of his top plays. This score is so impressive, but it also leaves the map at a weird place, with 1 S rank, 1 miss, and so many runs ruined by nerves, with the map's legendary status almost being exactly what stops it from being able to be FC'd. The story of Yomi Yori obviously isn't over yet, but for some reason, despite a 1 miss and a literal S rank, the map seems so far away from an FC. I would love to be proven wrong, but with nearly every player mind-blocked in the beginning, and the small handful of runs that go past it being ruined by nerves, it feels like Yomi Yori has been crushed under the weight of its own accomplishment, a map almost too legendary for its own good. And I think that's pretty sad.